Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this November edition of Black Country Society online talks. My name is Ward Jones. I'm one of the presenters. Um, in charge of our evening tonight is someone who is well known to all of us, I guess. If she isn't, she ought to be. Uh, she's a writer, a novelist, a performance poet, and of course, the esteemed editor of the Black Country Society's magazine. A word of welcome. She needs no introduction to Emma. And this evening we have a trawl around Black Country poetry with Emma and Friends. And before I hand over to Emma, can I just remind you, please switch off your audio. Um, because otherwise, as we heard earlier on, we had somebody's television in the background. Um, uh, that might be slightly preference to our own ramblings, but whatever, if we could abandon audios completely, that would be much appreciated, and then we can have some quality time together. Without further ado, Emma, it's over to you. Thank you very much for what you've set up this evening.
Oh, thanks, Ward. Lovely to see everybody. What we're going to do during the evening, which I'll explain in a second, we will be doing some screen shares. So some of the poetry will appear on the screen. When that happens, if you are on speaker view, you can actually push the poem out of the way if you want to and just look at the person talking. That's just a little tip in case you don't want to look at the words, you just want to listen. Anyway, what I'd like to do this evening is to look at Black Country poetry partly through the lens of the Blackcountryman magazine over the years, but also to give you a bit of a flavour of some of the poets and spoken word artists that currently work in the region, doing Black Country centric work and what their approaches are. There are perhaps more people than you might imagine writing poetry about our region, and I've got a couple of them with us this evening who will be sharing their thoughts and chipping in with poems. So what I'm going to do first is I'd like to take you back to the very first edition of the Blackcountryman, and we're going to look at the first poem published in the Blackcountryman magazine, and hopefully that will come up in a moment as a screen share so you can actually have a look at it. There we go. And as I say, if you are on speaker view, there's a little grey bar in the middle of your screen between the person talking and the poem, and you can use that to make the poem bigger or smaller. So this poem is by a chap called Len Hickman, and I'm going to ask Steve Pottinger if he would unmute and read Len's poem.
Yeah, good evening. Very happy to do that. This poem is called The Hurst Hill Gardener. When the history of old Coseley is written in the book, you'll find the name of Hickman there, if you care to look. In letters gold, his tale is told of how he fought the foe of glorious deeds as he killed weeds with his mighty hoe. His battles with the cabbage fly and the onion maggot, of how he fought the mighty slug and licked that man Sid Baggett, of how he won the Coseley Cup, this great feat recalls, of how he made Ron Prosser shout, he's got me by me Brussels sprout, of how he flew with the bag that's blue and all the cash he'd got. He's somewhere down in Rio now, relaxing on his yacht. So when you read of Hercules and all the rest, there's no doubt that you'll all shout, old Hickman was the best.
Thank you, Steve. So what do we have there with that poem? It's a humorous rhyming poem, which actually changes rhyme scheme in the middle of it, but it doesn't seem to actually affect the poem because it's something that can be performed, as Steve read it really well there. The only mention of the Black Country really in that poem is a reference to Hurst Hill, Coseley, and the use of yo, so you'll find. Other than that, it's quite gentle. It's the sort of thing that can be read quickly and easily and would sound, and did sound when Steve read it, lovely in the local accent. Humour is definitely a prominent feature of Black country
there's no
poetry.
sound, I'm not even going to put the video. I don't need to, so honestly, you're fine.
Sorry. Humour is definitely a prominent feature of Black country poetry, both now and then. And in modern times, on the Black country spoken word scene, the people who spring to mind who are doing that sort of poetry to great effect are people like Moggs and Sandra Robinson. Moggs, whose latest book is for sale on the Black Country Society's online shop, has got a collection called Black Country Chaps Life of Rhyme, and it's all very humorous Black Country related poetry. I did ask Moggs if he was able to come along this evening, but sadly he's on a flight from Prague as we speak, so Moggs won't be joining us. The next poem that I'm going to share is one of the first ones written by a woman to be published in the Blackcountryman magazine, and this was in issue 2. I'm going to read this one, and it's by somebody called Molly G. Williams. The Choir Trip. There was me and Tommy Harrison and little Jimmy Smith, and Alf and Albert Jenkins went on the choir trip. The boat had been fresh whitewashed to keep our best clothes clean. We all had a clean paper collar on, and in charge was Isaac Green. He was our choir master, but he couldn't sing a note. Had a voice like a farthing bladder, but he walked a bad old bloke. The oss started up the towpath, and the boat began to go, and Alf and Albert Jenkins shared out their unmade brew. We just got feeling merry when it started on to rain. Then a sudden yell from Isaac. He dropped his watch and chain. I fetched it out to look at it, to see what time we'd made, but I fed it to the jackbannocks in mistake for a lump of bread. We firked about in the water, but it worked to no avail. Then to make bad matters worse, it started on to hail. We was halfway to Reed's Wood afore we seed the sun. By now we was like drowned rats, and the homemade brew was done. We'd just reached our destination when the boat began to leak. The oss looked ready for the knacker's yard, and the outlook looked quite bleak. Let's go and catch the tram back, said Albert, Jim and Tom. So that was the end of the choir trip, and was we glad to get home. But if you're ever under Bug Hole Bridge, and a watch and chain is seen, don't forget I told you, it belongs to Isaac Green. That's a very different poem to Len's poem. This poem's a narrative. It tells a proper little story, and it uses dialect widely and to great effect. Rhyming again, but lots of lovely off rhymes in this one as well, so it's not quite perfect. Molly G. Williams could definitely write, and for me it's a pleasure to read her words, because quite often with dialect writers, and I was discussing this with Heather Wasty the other day, we have different styles and there's no actual glossary for how to write it. Heather's actually here, so I'm going to ask Heather to unmute and perhaps elaborate a little more on that and tell us why she uses dialect in her work. She's going to read a couple of poems, I think, and I believe she might have a poem also to read by another poet that she admires. So, Heather, are you there? Oh, somebody's asked what a jackbannock is. It's a stickleback or a small fish.
That I am here, yes. Thanks very much, Emma. I really enjoyed the way you read that poem. Thank you. And Steve, Boston. Incidentally, Boston, there's no other word like Boston. I use it a lot, even when I'm not speaking in dialect. I grew up in Cradley Heath, surrounded by lots of people speaking dialect, but me and my family didn't really use it much ourselves. So I kind of feel like I'm bilingual, and Black Country Spake is my second language. So when I write poetry, I either write in standard English or in Black Country. I don't tend to mix the two. And the poem I'm going to read, Takes Me Back, is actually a new version of a poem. Shockingly, I wrote in 1993, I discovered when I looked on my computer. This poem was about the street where I lived until I was 12 with my family. And the first version of it was called 37 Hollywood Street, which I just wrote in standard English. Then in 2015, I was commissioned to write a poem for something I'd never heard of, which is International Mother Language Day. And I was just really chuffed that someone considered that I would do a poem in Black Country dialect as the mother language. So I decided to write a new version of 37 Hollywood Street. And before I actually read it, I'll talk a bit more about how and why I write. But I thought it'd be interesting to choose a bit from the first version, 37 Hollywood Street, and then a bit from Text Me Back to show you how it differs. There's a woman called Alice who was our neighbour, and she appears in both versions of the poem. In the first version, well, in both versions, she's doing the one thing I saw her do as she went past our window. So in the first version, and there goes Alice in carpet slippers, fulfilling her daily pledge, striding uphill to a soul in need with a plate full of meat and 2 veg. So that's just standard rhyming. When I came to do Text Me Back, I didn't really do the rhyming, but I felt a bit closer to Alice because I used the dialect. This poem takes me back to Alice, marching past our window to help Mr. Williams, who was short of 1 leg, taking him meat and 2 veg for his dinner. Now, there's no way I would have said short of 1 leg in normal English. When it comes to spellings, I find that really hard. I have to think really hard about how to spell the dialect because it's meant to be spoken, not written. So I try to do it as close as I can to the way I pronounce it and try to be consistent through the poem or through a collection. I'm going to read a poem by Dave Reeves in a bit, and I noticed that he spells the word dough differently from me. I would spell it D-O-H, and he spells it D-O-E. And Dave plays with rhymes, as you'll see in his poem, and I love playing with words. So writing in Black Country dialect enables me to do things like rhyme words that wouldn't normally rhyme. So one of my poems, well, actually in Text Me Back, I've got the rhyme of still see her with standing there, which I actually only noticed when I was preparing for tonight. That's an internal rhyme in that poem. And in another poem that I've written, I rhymed code as in secret code with code as in runny nose. So it looks like the same word, but it means 2 different things. So I'm now going to read Text Me Back. This poem takes me back to terraced houses on an hill, with front rooms kept for Sunday best and big fat windowsills. This poem takes me back to coal in the coal hole, wood in the stove, an entry, a fold, and an outside loo, parklets on a fork, toasted with love. This poem takes me back to disembodied vices torturing God once a week down the mission, the valeting bull, the drap homer's thud. This poem takes me back to Alice, marching past our window to help Mr. Williams, who was short of 1 leg, taking him meat and 2 veg for his dinner. This poem takes me back to the woman who wanted to borrow our phone to make assignations with men, because a day I one of her own, near a mon, near a phone. This poem takes me back to trips up the road to Dinglish Shap, where I like to say, cheese please, Louise, in me head, as her cut off a slab. This poem takes me back to our painted lady with pitch black hair, a buxom wench, all is tarted up. I can still see her standing there. This poem takes me back to the only building still left standing, the pub that I did go in as a child, but I do now. You could call it bonding. Thank you. So the next poem which will come up is inspired by items in the news when I was writing this in 2016 about how children should be taught proper English and shouldn't use dialects at school. And I was talking to this bloke whose wife said she didn't want him to be talking dialect with his grandchildren. And I thought that was a real shame. So I'll just have a sip of water. Well, I'm telling you it's water. It might not be, of course. And this is English lesson. Watched rhymes with catched, but catched a word, according to our teacher. It ought to be caught, and watch rhymes with botch, and waiter don't rhyme with tater. I ought to say water when I'm at school, and potato rhymes with yo. I caw say I caw, I won't say I wore, I shouldn't say dough, so I dough. And the poem I'm going to read by Dave Reeves, who actually was from Netherton, so it could be a million miles away, really, Netherton to Craigleith. And the way Dave wrote, he loved playing with words like I do, but he kind of took it to the extreme. And this is a very conversational poem, so it's not a standard in stanzas, rhyming at the end of the lines, and it's actually quite tricky to read. But when I pull it off, I really, really enjoy it. So this is Told Paradox. When I was a child, I was always being told to be told. You'll be told, I was told. Yet I knew damn well that if I went and sat squat on me haunches, goggle-eyed and gulping, it chose hopping as a mode of ambulation, I'd get a cuff round the ear hole. And by cuff, I don't mean a germ-laden spasm of the bronchial tract, powered by an involuntary squaging of the lungs. Tay what I mean. Tay. And while that itself, tay, might also suffice for the word for a brewed beverage of dried leaves, besides being the word for a light meal that comes either before or after your dinner, dependent. And if you have to ask dependent on what, how certainly I got any concept of the British caste system as I can see. I'm simply using it here as the negative. Tay. Tay what I mean at all. But to get back to the paradox. Was I told? Did I become the sort of person you could rub on a wart and it'd drap off? Did the insistence that that'll learn you actually achieve its objective? Was I taught? Wound tight, my friends, wound tight and ready to snap.
Thank you, Heather. That was wonderful.
I love that poem.
It's a great piece. Dave Reeves's pamphlet, Black Country Dialectics, is actually available on the Black Country online shop to buy. Dave is sadly no longer with us, but as part of the pamphlet, you get a CD of his wonderful words as well. So currently, folk writing and working in dialect that spring to mind locally are Heather, who's just read, Brendan Hawthorne, who's won the dialect speaking poetry competition, I think the national one, a couple of times, R.M. Francis, myself, and Billy Spatemon, who sings using dialect. I'm sure there are loads of others, and if you know of any, you can tell me later on. There is one dialect writer that's gone mainstream and is raved about in the wider world of poetry, and that is the incredible Liz Berry. If you don't know Liz Berry's work, then I urge you to check it out. She's a bestseller in poetry terms, and her first collection, which was called Black Country, had great critical acclaim. And it isn't humorous poetry, it is haunting, ethereal work, really. Every Christmas they play Lizzie's poem Christmas Eve on Radio 6 because Kerris Matthews is a big fan. And every time I hear it, I blart. And I'm sure that unsuspecting Black Country folk who accidentally catch it on there also, the same thing happens. It is just beautiful. You can see it on YouTube if you put in Liz Berry and Christmas Eve. You'll be able to hear and see Liz reading that poem. Okay then, so far we've looked at Black Country centric poetry where local chaps and wenches read humorous poetry which works in their natural local accent, and also the poets that are preserving the old words, so actually using dialect, because it might be the words they used as children, words they use now. But those are the kind of two things we've looked at so far. There is also a history of poets who have created poems for particular events in our region, perhaps for civic occasions. And an example of one of these from the past is, I'm going to get Steve to read to you now. And this is an example from Thomas Bratt, who was known as the Portobello poet. Portobello being an area of Willenhall, well, next to Willenhall, really. So, Steve, if you could unmute and read that to us, that would be fab.
The Willenhall Fire Brigade. They're a band of noble fellas, an honour to the town, who should command your sympathy and never meet a frown, for they are ready any time to lend a helping hand. Then do your best now called upon to help this little band. And on the demonstration day, fall in the ranks each trade and show your townsmen you respect the Willenhall Fire Brigade. Pass no remarks about the men, for which of you would give the precious life he owes so dear that other ones may live? 'Tis easy to laugh and sneer the efforts by them made, but lend your hand when called to help the Willenhall Fire Brigade. And on the demonstration day, fall in the ranks each trade and show your townsmen you respect the Willenhall Fire Brigade. I've often heard a saying told that neither man nor fools can render their assistance if they haven't got the tools. But if these men are willing now to give the town their aid, then buy an engine to assist the Willenhall Fire Brigade. And on the demonstration day, fall in the ranks each trade and show your townsmen you respect the Willenhall Fire Brigade. When frost and snow lie on the ground, they're ready at your call to go and check the vicious flames in cottage, house or hall. They'll risk their lives to save your child. Then do not be afraid to patronise the men we call the Willenhall Fire Brigade. And on the demonstration day, fall in the ranks each trade and show your townsmen you respect the Willenhall Fire Brigade. If death should ever cross their path, think of their children dear, whose father gave his life away for someone standing near. Think of their loving mother too. She'll surely need your aid, because she lost her husband in the Willenhall Fire Brigade.
Thanks, Steve. That tribute to the brave men of Willenhall Fire Brigade was written in 1893, and it appears to have been written to raise funds for a new fire engine for the brigade, because copies of it were sold for 1 penny each. The Portobello poet, who went on to write other poems, including another poem for the fire brigade, which we're not going to read, but I did like the little anecdote that goes with it. So, after a fire on the 18th of January in 1902, when St Thomas's Church in Wensfield was destroyed, apparently Wolverhampton Fire Brigade attended, but Willenhall Fire Brigade never actually arrived. And much of the blame for the large amount of damage to the church was aimed then at Willenhall for not turning up. But Thomas Bratt, Portobello poet, came to their defence by writing about why they hadn't managed to get there. And it was apparently due to a lack of horses. And the second Fire Brigade poem by Bratt asks for a car to be bought to support the engine previously supplied to the brigade, which I thought was a lovely story. Thanks for reading that, Steve. And Steve is from Willenhall, so perhaps Thomas Bratt sounded similar. Who knows? I'm going to read a poem of my own now that was written to commemorate something. And this was, I was lucky enough to be Poet Laureate for the City of Wolverhampton. And during that time, had to write some what I would call kind of civic poems And this one was one of those. So Wolverhampton was celebrating being 20 years a city, and the local radio got in touch and said, "Can you write us a poem?" And they goes, "Oh yeah, I think so. When do you want it?" And they said, "Tomorrow." So, oh, great. So I went away and went on Facebook and asked the good people of Wolverhampton what they thought should be mentioned in a poem about the city to celebrate it. So this rhymey poem was the result, written overnight at the request of the radio. What's great about this city? Well, Bab, where do you want us to start? Perhaps with the culture, with music, with theatres, with art, or perhaps with green spaces like Bantock, West Park, or perhaps with our motto about light from the dark. Or maybe our history, like that old Saxon cross, or maybe Lady Wulfruna, or the man on the Oss, or the first set of traffic lights, green for goal, and we're off. Or maybe our humour, 'cause we do like a laugh. Perhaps we could tell of good times down the pub, the Chapel Ash Triangle, then head for a club. Or maybe our industry, good years and chub. Or Queen's ballroom memories where grandma found love. We could mention good access by canal, rail or car, our talking in vowels the way we aye and ah, or the view from St. Peter's, both the near and the far, or the fact that you're welcome, whoever you are. We're wolves, aye we. We're warm-hearted and witty. We celebrate rough edges, the urban, the gritty. So join us, raise a glass to 20 years as a city, to a future what's golden, where we're all sitting pretty. By the end of that week, the TV people had got in touch and asked if I could make a film of it as well. So that was really lovely. It got quite a lot of attention, which was nice, although it was in lockdown, so I had to film myself and record myself in both cases. There is also a history of poets who have created poems for sort of hang on, what's this? Yeah, a history of people who've created poems to commemorate events that have happened in Black country history, and bring them perhaps back to life for a modern audience. I know I was asked not so long, well, a couple of years back, to create a poem about the explosion in Tipton and Greatbridge that killed some young women and girls working in a factory there. And I spent hours researching this in the back of Tipton Library. And we know, of course, that good historians can bring history to life, but sometimes a poem can add a little bit of something extra and perhaps create a potted version or a visual representation or a snapshot or a sense of something that maybe just history itself can't quite do. Marion Cockin is also here this evening. And if Marion can get ready, I'm going to ask her to tell us a little bit about some research she did to create poetry. I recently published a piece in the Blackcountryman about Marion's work, and it explores the cholera outbreak in Bilston during the 19th century. So Marion, are you there? And do you want to tell us why you wanted to research that? We can't actually see you. We've got a nice picture of you, but I don't know if you can get your camera on. But if not,
yeah, there's something wrong with my camera, so you'll just have
no
to...
problem. We can look at the nice smiley face, but I'll leave you to tell us that.
Yeah. Actually, this all started, the particular cholera epidemic. Well, it started in Bilston at Emma's workshop, because Emma used to run a Women Who Write group. And for the second pamphlet, we wanted to find bits and pieces about Bilston. And I became totally obsessed by the cholera epidemic. Luckily, as I work in the library, one of my colleagues, Andrew Scragg, is a man with a huge brain. And he said, I know, Down in the cellar we went. This is before archives. Down in the cellar we went, and he found a brown cardboard box, and out of that he produced a pamphlet about the cholera epidemic in Bilston in 1832. And from that pamphlet, all my poems came. This is the Cholera Orphans, which was published in the Blackcountryman a while ago. The headline to this poem is "Those poor children. I know most of the rich have put their hands in their pockets to help build the school, but I still think we brought it on ourselves. I've taken 2 orphans in, but I can't take any more." This is from a mother of 6. And so this was an article from David Moore, historian and photographer. And I learned there were 450 children under the age of 12 who were made orphans. Many residents who survived cared for them for many years to come. On the 1-year anniversary of the epidemic, funded by public subscription, the Cholera Orphan School was opened. Each of the orphan children were given a medal so they could attend the school, the medal being hung from the neck by a black ribbon. Cholera Orphans, 1833. Dressed in rough, ill-fitting clothes and shoes too big or small, we stood in rows in the muggy drizzle of an August day, alone. We held back months of grief behind our painful smiles, and thank you, sirs, as the millstone of a medal, heavy with the unknown future and the dismal past, was hung around our dirty necks. These words were cast in metal like a brand. Cholera Orphan School opened August 33. Number of orphans 450. Like sheep, we followed them to school as important men dropped prayers to Almighty God in every room. You know that God, the one that took our parents and our friends, the God that feeds us with our bitter daily bread and bowls of tepid gruel. They poured us wine and gave us cake and led us to the church to sing the practised hymn. Now I lay me down to sleep. Pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I die before I wake, pray the Lord my soul to take. Thank you.
Thank you, Marion. What an amazing bit of research, and then to kind of convert it into poems in that way, to sort of paint pictures of what it must have been like. So yeah, thank you. That was beautifully read. I think it's a great thing to be able to do that, show an element of history via a poem. In recent Black Country magazines, we've also had an article which reanimated the life of Sister Dora through poetry. Some of you might know that Sister Dora was a medical professional who worked in Warsaw and did a tremendous amount for the town. And the people of Warsaw actually funded a statue to Sister Dora. And I believe I'm right in saying that that was the first statue of a woman that was not a royal to exist in this country. I don't think I've made that up, but you might want to Google that to check, because I've just plucked that bit of information from my brain on the hoof. But the poet that did the Sister Dora piece was a woman called Laura Stanley, whose poems aren't actually published yet as a pamphlet, but hopefully at some point they will, because they're rather fabulous. And I actually saw the piece on a national poetry site and thought, oh, I know who that is. I know who she's talking about, and got in touch with Laura and asked if she'd do an article for the magazine, which she did. I've recently been writing quite a lot of poems about Percy Shakespeare, who's a Black country artist. And this is ekphrastic work. When we write about artwork, so that's another thing sometimes that poets can do quite well, to sort of interpret an artwork. And I've been doing that just because I think he isn't well known enough, and I want people to look at his paintings more. Recently in the Black Country as well, I've been privileged to work on quite a few promenade performances, which is where a historian will take a walk around a place, and then poets have popped out and performed on the site some of the work that relates to the place. I've done one in Tipton and a couple in Wednesbury. I'm looking to try and do another one of those, so do keep and watch this space on that. But I'm going to ask Steve Pottinger to read one of his own poems this time, which was written for a Wednesbury promenade that we created, but then later they asked us to turn it into a performance piece in the Black Church on the hill. And Steve's poem is looking at early history of our region, and it's actually in the voice of the hill. So Steve, if you're there, can you unmute and do your poem?
Yeah, thanks, Emma. Yeah, the when we turned the promenade into a sort of performance within the church, each of the poets had to become a part of Wednesbury's history and make the case to God for why they were the one that should be saved. And so I chose the hill that the church was built upon. See, I was here first, and that's what counts. As the ice slipped north and the land bounced back, greened, turns its face to the sun, I was the one who looked out over creation, saw that it was good. Birds, foxes, badger, deer, all of them making their home here on my slopes, and yeah, up here I cop for all the weather. But I tell you, in the spring light when the celandines are 1,000 yellow suns amid the oak and the alder and ash, there's nowhere better than me, me babs. There's nowhere better than me. And when you came with your pigs and your clearings, I got used to hearing the guttural of Saxon. Watched you putting your backs to the task of farming, cutting stone for Ethelfleda to crown me with a fortress. Oh yeah, I was the one who saw you find coal and ore, how you scurried in your busyness like ants. And I didn't turn away, my people, not like some who were appalled, drew their curtains, travelled on. I saw the beauty in fire and furnace and locomotion, the miles of brick laid one atop another, the homes and hovels you made for yourselves. I listened as you sang in backstreet pubs, roared at cockfights. Some nights, when the wind was up and a gale blew round me shoulders, I sang along. Oh, there's nowhere better than me babs. There's nowhere better than me. I'm with you now. Always, still, through lean times, through do and men, through the tatting and the scratting, the scraping together of pennies, the waiting for whatever's next. On the hill at your heart. And I tell you this, it'll all pass. We'll be blessed again with times of plenty, with newcomers whose words are as mysterious and loving as a Saxon's mother to her babbies, soft and enduring as a Blackcountryman's hope. We'll cope together through sun and rain and wind and snow, 'cause you know there's nowhere better than me babs. There's nowhere better than me.
Beautiful. Thank you, Steve. I'm not surprised you cop for the weather. Nothing between you and the U rules. Of course, there is also the writing of poetry that brings family history to life. And although this might be subject matter of a more personal level, these poems can resonate with people who have a shared cultural frame of reference, but also inform historians about the way things were. I'm going to now invite Michael Coley Smith to read two poems from his collection, Driving My Father North. And this work, it looks back to a childhood in the Black Country in the 1940s, and in particular explores how that was coloured by the Second World War. Michael, are you there?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
When
when you're ready.
Hear me? Can you hear me and can you
Yes,
see me?
we can hear you. We can't see you, but we can hear you.
You can't
nice
see
and-
me? Why can't you see me?
I don't know, Michael, but we can hear you loud and clear.
I don't. You should be able to see me, so I'm not quite sure what's gone wrong.
Oh, there you are now. We
Okay,
can see
can you see me now?
Yes, we
Good,
can.
good. I'm not so much used to this. Yeah. Can I actually see myself on here too or not?
No, I don't think you can.
Right,
So.
okay. All right. Hello, everyone. Just like to thank you, Emma, for including me in tonight's program. It's a real privilege to be with people who have an interest in the Black Country and in poetry. I grew up in Hasbury on the edge of Howes Owen, and I was 3 years old when the Second World War began in 1939, and I was 9 years old when it ended in 1945. It was actually later, much later, when my mum died and my dad moved away from Hasbury, that I began looking back to those years of growing up in Hasbury. And this first poem, it refers to an event not so long after the war ended, an event that for us kids was pretty momentous. Sturmer's in this poem, by the way, was the main grocery shop in Hasbury. So here's the poem. Ice cream. We heard the cries. Ice cream! Ice cream at Sturmer's! Soon, a crowd of us stood at the shop door, the door resolutely closed, Mr. Sturmer's lunch hour going on and on. Open up, you old bugger, someone shouted, but the shop stayed empty. Promptly at 2 o'clock, Mr. Sturmer appeared, fastening his white coat. Ignoring us, he leaned into the refrigerator, then decisively closed its lid. At the door, he glared at us. Unbolting it top and bottom, he opened it a crack. It ain't frozen. You'll have to go home and get cups. What's he say? It ain't frozen. We stood bereft, then turned and ran. And bring a spoon with you, Mr. Sturmer yelled. Back with our cups, Mr. Sturmer dipped his scoop. High priest doling out sacred stuff. There on the pavement, we spooned it up. Vanilla, cold, creamy, honey sweet on our tongues. It was everything we'd learned to long for, to crave, everything the war had carried off. We didn't care that it was liquid. It was ice cream. We believed in it. We wanted more. Right, okay. As you can see or hear, I'm not attempting to write in Black Country dialect. I'm simply using it when I think it's appropriate. This second poem, Snow That Came After War, the context of the poem is the very hard winter of 1945-46, which came only a few months after the Second World War finished, and it was a time. I should point out, because of its reference in the poem, that my father was actually working in Smethwick as a steel forger. He was making parts for tanks and aircraft, and he wrote this about walking home at night from Smethwick to Hasbury. Actually, not walking, but cycling. He actually says in what he wrote, it was 8 miles on my cycle to home. Some of my journeys were quite an experience. The night sky would be full of flashes, guiding the enemy raiders to their target. And we, of course, were in the target area. It was often a matter of dodging from one shelter to another all the way home. I sometimes entered as many as 14 shelters before I got home. The next day often showed how lucky we'd been. Buildings would still be smouldering and the streets littered with glass. There'd be bomb craters everywhere and sometimes unexploded bombs. In one instance, I saw a bomb hanging from telephone wires. So that's what my father wrote about. That particular his experience of working in Smethwick and then cycling home. Okay, snow that came after war. Another reference in this is Bloomer's Bank. This was a hill that was in Hasbury, just off the main road, the Hagley Road. A place that now doesn't exist any longer. It's all covered in houses. Okay, snow that came after war. When the snow on the bank by Bloomer's farm melted, it froze fast. Ice glazed the hill like thick plate glass. As if from a glacier, ice slid under fences. It spread hard and grey over tarmac and pavements. Staying upright was tricky. Walking to town, people slipped, their feet skidding from under them. Sprawled on their backs, they struggled up to go on, step by step, grasping at walls and lampposts. A shift of mind took falling as inevitable, bruising likely, a toss-up that bones might fracture, a chance to be calculated, a risk accepted, like dodging bombs in a night raid as you cycled home. It was kids who took to the ice in play, performing on the polished brow of the hill, a little jig purely for momentum. Then off down, arms thrown out, a swishing, carefree rush of speed. That winter, we were offered a world new made, stark, bright, unpredictable, snow, a mute, blank space. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. That was beautiful. What gorgeous poetry. Marion Cockin also has a lot of poems exploring a Black country childhood, but her experience is Wednesbury, and some of them appear in her full collection, The Wednesbury Mangle Theory, and some also appear in Now Maker's Daughters. The latter is available on the Black Country Society online shop. They're both published by Offers Press. I'm going to ask Marion if she'd unmute and read her poem Common, which I'm sure she'll explain why she wrote it.
We lived, not to be rude, in the roughest council estate in Wednesbury. All my dad wanted was to get to the poshest estate, which was the golf links estate in Wednesbury. He also had great aspirations, for us, even though we were girls. So we really had to know what was common and what wasn't common. By the way, we never had Black Country fiddle in our house, I tell you. So common: grey pies and bacon, fruit bowls in windows, plaster Alsatians, faggots and chicklings, fried brains and tripe, tap dance and ballet, it makes your kids brassy, flouncy net dresses and smooth satin sashes, petunias, all colours, kids with no knickers, women in trousers with red nails and lipstick, smoking or drinking, shouting or whistling. ITV programmes, the Flea Pit Rialto, pop from the pop van, live chicks from the ragman, never, never high purchase, catalogue bargains, men in their undies, playing cards on Sundays, bottles on tables, prize-winning dahlias. But worst of the lot is the secondary mod. No 11 plus failures, not in this house.
Thank
So
you,
it's like
Marion. Speaking as someone who frequently had pop from the pop van. Okay then, so to recap, up to this point we've got humour, we've got dialect, we've got celebrating and marking current events, we've got bringing the past to life for new audiences so that things from our collective and personal histories and heritage aren't forgotten. But before we close, we've also got to consider, I think, contemporary poetry that observes the now, often in minute detail, the people watchers. And that's what I've been doing in my latest collection, Unsung, from Offers Press. And it's what Steve Pottinger does brilliantly in many of his poems in his collection, Snapshots from the Fall of Home, which is published by Ignite Books. This people watching is the here and now, but within it, there's often reference to overheard speech. And that may or may not be useful to people in the future to know what we were thinking and what life was like. So Steve is going to share a piece of recent observation from his work, and then I'll do a little bit from mine, and then there'll be one more poem to close. So we're nearly at the end. Steve, are you there?
I am, yeah. So I'm just going to read you this poem. It's a little, well, it tells its own story. It's called Magic, Stafford Street, 9:43 a.m. He sits outside the cafe in the morning sun, practices the art of becoming invisible. It's not that he's still, though he is, nor that he's ordered a bacon roll and has been drinking instant hot and milky from a mug that steams in January cold. It's not that the table he sits at is flimsy, nor that the chair missed out on better days, has one leg shorter than the other, wobbles, is a triumph of necessity, hope and tape. It's not that he's hidden beneath a flat cap older than you are, nor that his hands swell at joint and knuckle, that there's dirt under the nails, that half a finger's gone. It's not that he's rolling himself a cigarette from the tin in his pocket. It's not his distant, watery eyes, nor the whiskers he missed with the razor. It's not the ash falling onto his coat, nor his teeth like tombstones. It's not that one day you will pass, see the table is empty, though the sun shines. It's not that you'll wonder what is no longer there, nor that you'll puzzle over just what it is that's missing from the morning, while somewhere he is fixing his pale eyes on something none of us can see, mastering his art.
Thank you, Steve. Another beautiful poem. And I'd like to just read an extract from, I've got a series of poems set in Willenhall Market, which I wrote in situ over a whole day of Midsummer Day last year and also Midwinter Day last year. So my idea was to go out and from sunrise to sunset, just record exactly what I saw and heard over the period of a whole day. I couldn't add any, I was just scribble for 2 minutes and then I'd go back in the house and write the poem, but I couldn't add anything to it. So this is just like literally what I saw and heard. So this is the final little extract from the Midwinter Day series. 2:17 p.m. Any three for a fiver now to clear 'em up. A man with a pink turban talks with his hands. The red fake flowers and the plastic trees are not selling. A woman in a tight red silk hood has a Bulls sweatshirt, Mickey Mouse on the sleeve of her coat, a Grinch on her bag. A woman with purple hair walks quickly. Another answers a phone. A third dons blue headphones with a gold star. A man's shoes squelch. A woman with a white Alice band drags a trolley. 5 people stare through a window at meat. 3:17 p.m. Near Court 1, bins overflow and a shopping trolley has crashed into an egg box. A Polish-speaking family are wandering. A man kicks a bag that used to contain fragrant jasmine, then limps on. A council truck drives towards the clock. A little girl with 2 snaking plaits runs in clumpy shoes. A woman in a face mask carries a Sports Direct bag. A ladder scales a wall, footed on the canopy above the shops. The Spuddy Marvellous serving hatch is shut. A blonde woman in black leans to grab a net of veg. In Golden Girl's window, a woman picks up a fallen bobble hat, arranges tinsel stoles around the shoulders of Elvis bags. 3:54 p.m. Sunset. A charcoal tree is sketched out on the peach and blue-grey ground of the sky. A steely block of flats appears distant. The windows above Blunt's are a wall of shoeboxes. Newspapers passed or bagged up, waiting outside Ladbrokes. On the main road, a bus rumbles. Outside Posh Nails, girls gather, too cold to hang around. A can of Red Bull rolls away. The fairy lights are twinkling. A child cries. A little girl in pink shouts, "Merry Christmas," high and clear. Merry Christmas, high and clear. So that's a little marketplace in Willenhall last year. When we look back over the Blackcountryman magazine over its 50+ years, we see many examples of these different types of poetry that I'm describing. And the poets that have appeared in the magazine have been many and varied. I've found over 60 poets who had work published over the years, including somebody called Spider, who we recently actually had somebody get in touch about asking if anybody knew who Spider was, and nobody seems to. So if you do, or you are indeed Spider, do let me know, because there's people waiting to find the answer. People like Hilda Francis, Norma Washbrook, Jeff Stevens, who ran poetry nights in Wednesbury for a long time, and indeed a poetry festival in Langley. Carol Deakin, Arthur Truby, Eileen Ward Birch, who's sadly no longer with us, but was a real stalwart of local poetry spoken word nights. Mike Tinsley, who I used to work with at Bilston College, who apparently wrote hilarious Black Country verse. Cully Coley appears, who is current poet laureate for the city of Wolverhampton, and she fuses Black Country language and dialect with Punjabi words and phrases in some of her poems. Paul MacDonald's in there. Sylvia Millwood, who worked at Hilltop Foundry and writes very beautifully about industry. And Geoffrey Southern, and so the list goes on. As editor of the magazine, I still do include poetry, but I don't have a designated poetry page. And it's deliberate because I know millions of poets and I'd be inundated. So the poetry that I include is part of an article. So it would be a poem that elaborates on something that somebody's writing about. It could be a poem that enhances a piece of writing or kind of takes it further, or it might appear as an example of somebody's work if I've done a Q&A with them. So if you have got poems up your sleeve, I'd love to see them, but as part of an article, if that makes sense. The most prolific poetry subject to the magazine over time seems to have been Jim William Jones. So perhaps we'll just end with one of his poems. And it's a love poem, because that's what us poets are doing, really, I think. Whichever way we choose to approach our writing, we are writing love poems to and about our wonderful region. So, yeah, I'm going to end with this beautiful piece by Jim William Jones. Now it comes. Between foundry stacks and the humped shoulders of blast furnaces, a jet plane, small as a gnat, cuts a slice out of the sky and drags cloud from it. A scarf of smoke winds round in the wind. The bulls and blarting, a bundle of loud voices goes rolling by. It's time to go. But I'm a-waiting a bit, hesitating by the big gates, ons in pockets, kicking the foundry dust off me boots, tired and sick, me throat thick with smoke and grit, me head split with the noise of wheels and clattering steel. Now her comes, across the grimy yard, as though I was in Imley woods, tripping through bluebells, sweet, clean, fresh as dawn on a mountain. Her sees me, as a smiling, quickening her step, and then a miracle. The foundry, the yard, the roaring road, all thoughts of the day's work, load 'em gone, and we'n one, me and her, walking in liquid gold, and the light all about we, which is a beautiful piece. Thank you so much for having us. I'm going to hand back to Ward, I think, possibly. But if anybody has got any questions, I'm sure any of us will be happy to answer them.
I'm going to hand over to Andrew, who's going to look after the questions.
Thanks a lot, Ward.